Okay, let me introduce the cast of characters here. In the front row, Steve Roach. All right. Hello. From the Bay Area, Robert Rich. Hello. From Mallorca, it's an island off the coast of Spain where he lives, Stefan Mikas. Not wearing his grown-up pants, Jeff Pierce. In back of Jeff is my dear friend and old colleague, Michael Stearns. They've got a mic back there. Next to Michael, Tim Story from Ohio. Next to Tim, Hans Christian. Hans was here in the Bay Area for many years, and I met him here, and he now lives in Wisconsin. And next to Hans is the only representative of the record industry, but he's actually an artist as well, Sam Rosenthal from Project Records. Next to me, Mike Watson from Ambient Music Guide and from Brisbane, Australia. There is a Brisbane in California, it's not that one. And this is Steve Davis, ladies and gentlemen. Wearing his Klaus Schulze t-shirt. Okay. I'm wearing the official AMBIcon t-shirt. Yeah. Okay, so this is the part of the thing that we've pre-programmed the least, but these people, all of them, are survivors in this very difficult arena we call the music business. They've managed through stealth and cleverness and sheer determination to make a career out of doing music, one way or the other. And my basic question is, how the hell did you do that? You know, I mean, so many people don't make it, you know. So everybody has had a different career and a different trajectory, and we want to just give you some insight into how that works. So, for example, Robert and Steve, you guys have been very active in essentially producing a lot of records, releasing your own music, touring and performing. You know, what's your secret for doing this? I'm sure there are a lot of other musicians that would really like to know.
Yes.
All right.
Well, for me, the core is just the absolute love of being immersed in this sound, And the sound, for me, is what, from the very beginning of wanting to do this, from hearing the early Klaus Schulze material, set this whole passion in motion. And the Follow Your Bliss, Joseph Campbell statement is absolutely, you know, so essential in that part. With that said, it's just that complete focus and dedication towards doing this sort of thing every day, starting with the sound and then creating pieces, and then those would start to form to what you would think of as an album, as a recording, a cassette at that time. I remember my first con experience was Comic-Con in San Diego in like 78, 79. I met folks at that time from the film industry, and I was already giving cassettes out of music I had created after 6 months of having an ARP 2600. And so it was just some sort of natural desire to want to connect and share that experience with people. And from that point, there was feeling like almost like when I don't have children, but the music for me was like children, and so the responsibility to the music to help find its way out became more of a part of the responsibility that I felt is along with creating it. So the natural desire to create the music, to put it together into a piece where I could share with people naturally. They were asking for a cassette in those early days. So then it just was a very organic process, but it just was so exciting to feel that natural evolution in that. And then meeting from that point in the early days, of course, before the internet, your connections like with Archie Patterson, who's here from Yurok Distribution, and he was one of the early pillars of getting the music out, sending the early music to Stephen. It was just like a momentum started to build, and it just didn't stop at making the music. I mean, the desire to connect with more people and share it with more people became just like, for me, it was a very natural thing. It didn't feel like I was doing music business and doing music. I was doing something that was fully integrated into the excitement of, creating and sharing and evolving to this moment right here. So, Robert.
So if I could boil that down to two words, produce and publish.
With passion.
Yeah, and passion. Okay. Robert.
Yeah, gosh, it's funny because I feel that when somebody does what they truly, deeply need to do, and love as well, but I think there's that sense that if there's certain things that everybody has inside of them that must be done, it calls. It's like a living thing inside of them, and it needs to come out. And if they find that thing, whatever it is, whether it's being a parent or cleaning the garbage out of your head, I don't know. When I was a kid, I had a bit of an existential crisis about age 13 or 14, and I was starting to feel the incredible weight of the existence and the universe, and felt that there was a need to do something that had to happen. And I just didn't know what it was that I was put here to do. And so, considering the various realms of my experience as a kid at the time, found the model of trying to discover the equivalent to the modern age that shamanism provided for our ancestors, or churches or religions might have provided in our culture as well. But find something that was relevant to critical thinking and to questioning and to doubt everything that I believed. So with that sense of purpose, wanted to discover a vocabulary of 21st century shamanism. And I saw in the culture of the time that music had a kind of communicating power that could reach people under their expectations and under the cultural framework that we come in. Music wasn't a natural expression for me. It was just one of the things that I did. And it became something that I could express ideas that I didn't know how to put into words. So as I started pursuing that, it started pursuing me, essentially. And it became kind of a duty that I was surprised. I was studying other things, and music kept following me. And then as a career, the original core of the question, when that starts happening, and when you have this sense of, I guess this is what I'm doing now, each moment in life becomes this process of unification of everything that you do. And that becomes saying yes to the different streams that come through you. So part of it is creating music, part of it is helping other people create music, part of it is just being part of the world and a good human being. And that's, to me, as Steve was saying, that sense of integrating all of the parts of you when you do something every day, and you treat your life as work, but also as play. It just becomes not separated. So this ability to wake up in the morning and and look at all the people around you who get up and go to work, and they separate that from their life. Then they come home and they spend time with their children, or they cook dinner, or they go to a movie, and these things are compartmentalized. The people they know at work are different from the people they know in play. And when you decide to make a completely integrated choice in your life, and work becomes play, and all of your people become, all of the people in your life become everything, and all of the people you communicate to with your work become your friends, as you people here. It's a very different way of existing, and I think that's what defines a life in the arts as opposed to a day job, I guess. But it's a full-time thing. It's 100% of the time.
Thank you. Stefan Mikas has had a very different trajectory than most of the people on this stage, because Stefan hooked up with Manfred Eicher 20-some albums ago, and all his music has been released on ECM, has been available worldwide all this time, and ECM is essentially part of the major label distribution system. So Stefan is the only artist on this stage that has had that experience. Has that been liberating for you, or has that been in some way, forced you to make compromises or change yourself, or have you just powered right through that and said, no, I'm just going to be Stefan Mikas, you deal with me?
Well, I feel similar to the two friends who spoke before, that I think the very important thing is that if you really have this urge inside you to express something, and then all the rest, it comes by itself, I think, because you ask basically about the music, the business side, no? And that was the core of the question before.
I was asking about career.
How you survive and all this.
Yeah, how have you managed your career?
So I don't know. I never thought about how I will make money in the end with all this. For me, it started when I still was in the school, and there was the first albums out from Ravi Shankar. In that time, it was 70 or 69 or those years, and I became fascinated with the Indian music, and I really wanted to learn the sitar and go to India, all these things. And who would have thought that one day I can make money with that? A German guy going to India and learn to play sitar. So I had the luck. My father was a painter, and he understood this kind of things. And then again, when I started with the recordings, I had a very naive approach. I had finished some demo tapes, and then I thought, okay, I want to make a record. So what do you do? I was with my father in Spain, and I said, okay, if you want to make a record, you have to go to London. So I didn't know anybody in London. I had a very old Fiat van, much worse than the Volkswagen, broke down all the time. So I just set off from Ibiza to London without knowing anybody, and I just went to 3 record companies, Transatlantic, Island, and Virgin, and I just stepped in their office and said, okay, here I have some tapes. It's now when you think back, it's kind of really crazy, But if you really believe in something, and there's always a way to do it, I think. So from those 3 companies, the Virgin, they wanted to make an album, and they did. And so with this album, later I met Manfred, and actually I knew him from before, but with this album it kind of impressed him, and it started from there, this relationship since, I think now, 40 years? And 20 CDs. And but the point is, what I want to say is that if you really if you start to play the music, and in the beginning you think, okay, how I will commercialize it, how I will make a living from this, and how I will get money, and how to do all these things. I think then probably, maybe some people can do it like this, but I believe the important thing is you really have something to say, and you feel this urge to do it, and then how to make a living, or so it will come by itself, I think.
Jeff Pierce has described himself as the baby of the group. He's only in his 40s, but yes, we're all very old. Thank you. But Jeff is far from the places you would normally think of successful musicians emerging from, as is Tim. I mean, they live in the Midwest. Jeff in Indiana, Tim in Ohio. Yet both of you have been able to establish yourself as artists. So how'd you do that?
Well, first of all, Robert's not wearing big boy pants either. I wanted to clear that, you know.
Point taken.
Okay. You know, I think I'm probably coming at this a little different than some of the other guys, in that, you know, when Hearts of Space started, you were playing music from, you know, Steve and Robert and Stefan and, you know, Tim and, you know, everyone. And I started out as a listener. I mean, I heard Hearts of Space on my local NPR station, you know, for the first time when I was in college. And, you know, I didn't know what to think of it. At the time, it just sounded like, you know, this voice from out of nowhere introducing this music that it was just, you know, it made me sit down, you know, during the episodes with a pencil and a piece of paper, waiting for you to get to the end so I could write down everything and then go to the record store and, you know, completely blow my food allowance for the week at college and, you know, buy everything I could. And, you know, after a bit, it sort of felt like that, you know, what you were doing was a bit more than just a radio program. You were, you know, connecting people, because I started to meet up with, you know, other people on campus, and I, you know, over here in the cafeteria, something about Hearts of Space, and yeah, I taped this, and, you know, I was talking to a whole lot of people here last night about how, you know, I still have about, you know, 40 cassette tapes of, you know, music from the Hearts of Space. And so when all of that, you know, wrapped up, I graduated college, and I graduated college with a degree in public relations, which I chose that major so I could spend most of my time playing the guitar, because they didn't have math classes and science classes. And after I graduated from college with a degree in public relations, I had even more time to play my guitar, because I didn't have employment. So at that point, it became, all right, I've got all this free time, and, you know, I can only make so many trips to the blood bank during the week, so I can, you know, work on music. And when I put my first CD out in 1993, and someone asked me last night, you know, so you've been doing this for 20 years, how much did it cost to put out your first CD on your own? And it cost, everything put together, $3,800 for 1,000 of them, and that was a bargain at the time. That was just like, wow, this is pretty good. Now you can put out, you know, 4 or 5 projects for that. I think I was fortunate to get in before the internet really took off, because I managed to get product in brick and mortar stores, and I established, you know, connections with people that ran, you know, the bookstores or the independent music stores, not because I was really focusing on that, but because that just sort of, like what Robert said, it becomes, you know, integrated, and then the people that were kind of customers become friends, and just over the years, they'd call back more, and sometimes they'd get out of the business, sometimes they'd switch businesses, and it's been crazy. And then the internet came along and told every musician up here, all you need to do is get a website, and you can sell your own music, and you're going to be a multimillionaire. And it's like, wow, that sounds great. Of course, it didn't quite happen like that, but then with iTunes and now streaming, as you brought up, being the future, it's just been, I wonder what's going to happen next. Brain chip, where you can stream directly, no need for headphones, it just goes right there. So I don't know, in other words. I have no idea how I got established other than just doing it.
Okay, so you're saying you were really lucky.
I was lucky to live in a place where I could hear Hearts of Space. Yeah.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Jeff. I think there's a mic in the back row also. Yeah. All right. So, Michael, I met Michael in Los Angeles in 1975, probably.
No, actually, we met in Berkeley in 1977.
I don't remember it that way, but whatever. But Michael and I remember going down to Los Angeles to see Michael in the early days, and Michael was playing music live in a movement studio called Continuum Montage, along with Kevin Brahaney. And so that was a very different way to get going than most people, yet it worked for you. So how did that happen?
Well, yeah, I fell into it like everyone else. I was living in Tucson, actually, in 1975, and I was going through what I would call a spiritual crisis, where everything just stopped working for me. And I had been playing guitar in bands for a number of years, playing out 6 nights a week, and I just decided I was going to put up all my equipment, sell it all, and apprentice myself to a Sufi mystic. Improbable as that sounds at this point in my life.
It sounds like a good choice, actually.
And I did. I sold almost all of my equipment, and then I met this woman who was coming through town, giving a workshop, Emily, who you know, and she whisked me away to Los Angeles, where I started playing the music that I do for her groups of people meditating, doing movement meditation, and I was given what I would call a transmission at this point in a series of dreams to record this this album called Ancient Leaves, and which I did, and then a second set of transmissions that I needed to actually do some live performances, and that's when I went up and did a performance in Berkeley. And that's when I met you, and you took me into a hot tub, and we spent all night talking in a hot tub till like 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning.
Too much information.
I wish I remembered that.
It's a little too intimate, but...
I'm going to get a lot of information from this gig.
So, you know, that album introduced me to you because you had already been playing it on Hearts of Space, and you had me come to the studio in 1977 or 78 and do a live interview with you, and it also planted a seed for me, although I had no idea at the time. There was a movie that was going into production, or actually post-production, called Koyaanisqatsi, and evidently the music was used as temp music. And that got me introduced for that film, and that got me introduced to Ron Fricke, who was the cinematographer of that film, and Alton Walpole, who was the editor. And then when they, and Godfrey Reggio was the director of that film. He's another Santa Fe person. And when Ron and Alton went on to do their first solo movie together, which was Kronos, they called me up and asked me if I would be interested in scoring that film. So that one album, Ancient Leaves, just... But I mean, you know, how does it happen? I mean, how does all of this happen? And it's really, it feels like magic or grace or destiny. And all that I'm asked to do really is pay attention in that way, and it just continues to unfold.
Thank you. Michael Dana, another artist that we published on Hearts of Space, made a similar comment to me about his film work, which is one relationship, in his case with AMBIcon, a Canadian director. Michael was from Toronto. One relationship that leading to one project can change the course of your life completely. And in his case, he won the Academy Award this year for a score for a film, Pi, the film Pi, Life of Pi. So I guess that's the takeaway from what you said. You have to pay attention to your relationships and your opportunities, and some of them just turn into magical changes. Tim, I've always marveled at the fact that Tim lives in Maumee, Ohio, a less strategic place to be in the music business you couldn't really imagine.
But it's really good if you're on tour and you want to stay at his house.
Yes.
Yeah, it's a good stop between coasts.
Yeah. So tell us something about your trajectory.
It's amazing coming from such a different place, but how similar the stories are to mine, really. I think you end up doing the thing that you can't imagine not doing somehow. And for me, growing up in the Midwest, I was fortunate to have a mother that played Debussy and Chopin on the piano and listened to The Rite of Spring and Bartok's Concerto for Orchestra and Barbra Streisand and Herb Alpert, just a huge variety of music. And growing up, I had no patience for the normal music channels. I never took music. I took a few guitar lessons when I was 8, was really intimidated by the guy who at the Christmas recital that we had didn't bother to plug my electric guitar in. But really that was fine with me, because none of that music really made much sense to me. It wasn't until later, fiddling around on the piano and the organ in my grandfather's house, that I realized that playing other people's music just had no interest for me. I was hearing different things, and at the time I was really fed up with what the Midwest had to offer, which was mostly Bob Seger and Aerosmith and all these, very, very dull, predictable rock bands. I was listening to everything from stuff that I loved, like Miles Davis and Bartok and Steve Reich and Soft Machine, Robert Wyatt, Cluster, Can, groups from Germany. And it struck me that I could make some nice noise in my own basement. So what really changed things for me was the advent in the late 70s of being able to have a 4-track tape recorder that I could actually, I didn't have enough confidence to get a group together. I didn't think that the vision I had would really translate very well. So to me, having 4 tracks that I could basically overlay and create these very small compositions with a very limited palette of sounds. I had a used electric guitar and found a couple of tape machines that I could do tape loops with, very early effects boxes and that sort of thing, and the piano upstairs that was mostly out of tune most of the time. And just began for 3 or 4 years making long forms, short form. I couldn't afford much tape, so unfortunately, sadly, I don't know what a lot of that stuff sounds like now, because I'd keep reusing the tape. That one's not so good. Let's record something else over that. But as time went by, after 4 years, I finally had 45 minutes of material that I didn't think sucked too bad, and send it out to, they were all labels in Europe, because it seemed to me that the most interesting homemade electronic, what was not called ambient music at the time, was being made in Europe. And Steve, I like your T-shirt. One of the tapes I sent was actually to Klaus Schulze, who wrote me back. I have this letter from 1978 from him that said, "I like your tape very much. Unfortunately, I don't really have a record label right now. I'm working on doing my own stuff." But it was a very gracious letter. But from that, it ended up into one of these 6 cassettes I sent out, ended up in the hands of one of his engineers, who played it in his car in Berlin for months. And a British music critic was there, found out about it, heard it in the car, and said, "Hey, this is pretty good. What is this?" This is some guy from America. I don't know anything about him. Shared his address. He wrote me and said, "There's a little label in Norway that is just starting up that I think would like your music." And one thing led to another, but it's a total small accidents and overlapping coincidences that really led to the very beginnings. And it was not for 5 years later that I had my first U.S. release on Windham Hill, after another crazy bunch of little connections, most of which was Will Ackerman stumbling on to a piano piece from one of these obscure records that he decided to put on a piano sampler, one of the few that actually had electronics on it as well. And from there, it just happened somehow.
Great, thank you. Hans, Christian has had a very interesting career, I think, from starting in Germany and then coming to Los Angeles to play bass in rock bands. Why don't you tell us about that, a little bit about that?
All right. So I grew up in Hanover, Germany, and I had my first cello lesson when I was 9 years old, which was January 20th, 1970. I remember it very well. And in 1974, I went to Bristol, England, as an exchange student, and was terribly bored. And my buddy there was a bass player, so I picked up his bass and started to teach myself on the bass. And the dual track modality was born, classical and non-classical, really. In 1976, I played in a flamenco group and a German rock band in the rock capital of Germany, Hanover, where the Scorpions are from, and we all tried to emulate the Scorpions by doing all kinds of silly things. Anyway, so I had a chance to record quite a bit. Both bands were doing recordings at the same time. And I discovered the magical world of the recording studio. I knew nothing about it. Back then, if we had 16 tracks, we were lucky. But there was a great studio in Hanover called Tone Co-op. It was a basement studio, but well-equipped, etc. So I got the bug there, and then a lot of things happened, a lot of searching, not knowing what to do with my life, loving music, but not seeing myself as a strict classical musician, wanting to make a living with music, but not as a music teacher. So there were some magical moments that somehow I found out about this music school in LA called Musicians Institute. And in a bold move that gave my parents a heart attack, I announced I'm going to move to America and to Los Angeles. And I didn't really know if Los Angeles was on the East Coast or the West Coast. But it didn't really matter. I was completely lost. But I went to LA. I checked out the school. They were very friendly. It was easy to pass the entrance exam. And 3 months later, I moved to LA permanently. I had a room at the YMCA. That was it. I lost all my suitcases. Only had my instruments with me. I had $300 in my pocket. That was it. And from there, I learned how to rent an apartment. I learned how to speak English, because the German schools don't teach the real English, you know. So it was a tough start. There was a drummer at this music school named Brock Wheaton, and Brock and I like to goof off. Screw the jazz lessons. We wanted funk. So we were heavy-duty funk, and Brock said, "Hans, want to do a gig?" I said, "Yeah, what's a gig?" I was green, I tell you. I said, "Well, I play with this performance artist named Johanna Wendt. We're playing at the Whiskey." So the Whiskey said, "Like a club? What is that?" I knew nothing about LA. So I showed up at the Whiskey, 600 people, sold out. Johanna was this checkout girl who worked at a penny, you know, it was a dime store or whatever, you know. And she said, "Hans, nice to meet you. Just stop playing when I do the thing with the fish." Okay. So Brock had warned me, it's going to be wild, just be your wildest self. So it was Brock Wheaton on drums, his brother Mark Wheaton on Buchla synthesizers, and myself on bass. And we were rocking the house until Johanna did Primal Screaming, brought out a giant real fish, ripped it open with a knife, and smeared the guts into her face. That was the cue to stop playing. So, well, America's an interesting country. So, anyways, so from there, I did 4 gigs with Johanna, 2 at the Whiskey, 2 at the Roxy. And then I quit the band because it was enough. But that gave me an entrance into the real music world of LA, the Hollywood scene, the original underground bands. And anyways, I want to speed up the story because there's a lot, but...
that was pretty funny, though.
Yeah. You know, I ended up playing, I replaced Flea, you know, Flea left the band called What Is This, which later became the Chili Peppers, so I did all that stuff. I played with Billy Idol, I did Solid Gold, all that kind of stuff. Point is this, after 6 years of LA, I realized that that wasn't my music. And I needed to move forward and find my own music. And there was a much longer journey ahead of me. And 15 CDs later and counting, I'm here to tell the tale. And I'm going to continue that later.
Thank you. Well, I know one of the points of the compressed version of the last part of that is that Hans moved to Northern California, where the Northern California culture worked his magic on him, and he worked his magic right back. So that has a lot to do with it. Okay, so here's the only person on the panel here who is not performing, but is himself a musician, as well as a producer, and has run a successful record label now for how many years? 30 years, right. Well, you look great. Sam Rosenthal from Project Records has published a lot of Steve Roach's music, has worked in the dark ambient, dark wave, goth genres. You know, you've had a very different trajectory from anybody else here. What's that been?
Well, the one interesting thing first is many of you I was in touch with like in the 80s by handwritten letters. So it's kind of weird to meet you all in one place after all these years.
That's the whole point.
Yeah. I mean, Steve is the only one with releases on Project, and it started with a fanzine that I made. I started putting out my own music, electronic music. I was into Eno, Tangerine Dream, Kitaro, back before he was, you know, mainstream America, New Age. And I really started a label to put out my own music so nobody else would be telling me what the music should sound like. And so Black Tape for a Blue Girl was my own music. And as, I guess, late 80s, still LP and then into the first CDs, there was sort of a network where I could put out other artists as well. And so I could give other artists what I wanted, which is nobody telling me what to do. You know, I would just let them, basically, some of them wanted to work, like mix their music with me or just give me a finished master, whichever it was. But it kind of allowed bands like Lycia and Love Spirals Downwards just to put out the record the way they saw it. And I met Steve because he was, well, I saw a few of Steve's shows, but he was producing my roommate Walter Holland's album. And so Steve was around and we started meeting, and then Steve had a track on a compilation I did, and then the first, I think, record was the collaboration with Vidna Manuela Souls. And so that sort of brought ambient specific music into the label. I think there was an Oyuki Conjugate record first. But once again, it was just, I never really felt the need to tell people what to do within their music. I just thought I can facilitate getting it out to making it available. And so the label went from cassettes to LPs to CDs and downloads over the years. And there were 289 physical records, and now there's probably 100 more digital records that are not physical. And I think most of us in the music industry are just kind of like, what's next? Where are we going? What's going to happen here? And I think a lot of the people up here have survived because they've created something very unique and connected with their fans. But as Jeff said, I think it's really hard. Hello? Uh-oh. I think, oh no.
Hang on.
I got a shout.
No, I think.
They're all dead.
Speak loudly.
I think it's really hard, like Jeff said, for post-internet bands to catch on because there's so much music out there. There's so many competition. So all of us have the advantage of having had music when you could establish bands. It's continuing to.
Yeah. No, he has a split.
So
Okay.
I think you had a chance to establish your music before the mass of music came up, where everything had sort of an equal footing. And that, I think, definitely helped bands who started 10 or 20 years ago. Here, you can talk into this one.
Yeah, doozy. This is a question for everyone. Analog versus digital synthesizers. Discuss. Steve, would you like to start?
Steve says I should start that one. My feeling is they're all just tools. I've gotten a bit of a reputation for being a poster child for big analog synthesizers, but the irony is that I've been talking to those builders, many of them are one-person companies, about hybrid digital analog because I like the interface of jacks and knobs in the more open format, but I like things behind those panels that do unusual time domain synthesis. So I think many of us who are pushing in, our expression into a realm with synthesis and electronics, I'm completely omnivorous as far as tools. I just want a tool that's deep enough that I can personalize with my own voice, that doesn't give me a ton of presets that confuse me. I want to just dive deeply. Analog is very immediate, it's fun, it's plastic. Digital is deep and allows all sorts of manipulations that I've relied on for years. For me, probably the best way of doing sound design is starting with a microphone and some object I'm scraping or hitting or brushing and slowing it down and making it go backwards and inside out, which is often a digital process. It doesn't matter, they're tools. It's like if you're talking to a sculptor and you say, glass or wood, discuss, Yes. So that's my answer.
Yeah, and a lot of that I'm right there with Robert with. For me, I still have such a strong connection to my analog instruments that I've been creating with for up to 30 years now. The Oberheim equipment, the expander you'll see in my concert is the same expander I used on Dreamtime Return. I've had it since the 80s. These are instruments like Hans's cello. They're instruments that you connect to, and they're instruments. I resonate with it as this expander's different than that expander. I have a few of them as backups because they're a piece that's really like an end-of-life instrument. When something dies in it, you can't get parts for them now. So there's really, something really unique and organic and special with the instrument. But beyond that, the sound of, to my ears, the sound of a classic analog synth is just absolutely visceral, and it speaks in a way that I'm not hearing from, a soft version on a laptop. And that's really the core of what keeps drawing me back to my my lifetime instruments. And there's like such a history. There's a library of sounds on some of these instruments. I could actually just put a blindfold on and just start going through presets and play. I don't need to see what it is even. I mean, it's just, and they're instruments that I've built and shaped and subtly carved on over years. And the beauty of like the analog sound with the digital memory is that you can keep updating the instrument, and then it's there, but the core of the sound is still has that visceral, warm analog. Of course, you have to marinate it in the proper reverb, and that's a big part of the sound in this music as well. But and with as Robert mentioned, the modular component. I mean, that's a world I'm exploring and have been for a lot of years, and connects me to my early days with the ARP 2600 and just the pure love and joy of tweaking and doing things from an experimental, just like what if mode is really possible with, you know, that. So, but I'm combining both now, and there we're back live. So yes, analog, long live analog.
Michael, I wanted to ask you specifically, your sound, sorry. Michael, I wanted to ask you specifically your, I guess, classic sound during the Hearts of Space years, and before that too, came from the Surge synthesizer. Have you found digital tools that can replicate that sound, that do it justice?
I was deep into analog synthesis with the Surge synthesizer, thanks primarily to Kevin Braheny, who wrote the first release on the Hearts of Space record label, Paralandra. And I did a lot of my seminal work on the Surge, and I got to a certain point before I left Los Angeles and moved to New Mexico, to Santa Fe, where the particular Surge that I had, you know, as Steve was saying, it was at its life's end. I mean, more than half of it was not functioning, and I was looking at sending it to the factory and how much that wasn't a factory. I was sending it to some guy's house to see how much it was going to cost to fix it. And at that same time, I was getting ready to work on Baraka, which is the film I did after Kronos with Ron Fricke. And I started to explore sampling. And in those days, it was, you know, I think I had a little Roland sampler, and I had to store the samples on floppy disks. And I had friends who had emus, emulators, and different things. And what I found is that I was the passion that I had been investing in analog synthesis and the exploration of patching, which is where you connect the modules in a large modular analog synthesizer. You know, there's a certain randomness and discovery, and it's almost like you're being led, and you make these mistakes, and then suddenly the mistakes turn into these incredible things. I was able to somehow shift into sampling my passion for that, and so starting at some point before Baraka, I really became a sampler. Not the way that samplers are used today, where it's, you know, beat chopping and everything's sunk up, but creating, as Robert was saying, starting with an open mic, recording my own sounds. My sample library is almost entirely unique to me. I've created the samples myself. But that kind of became my signature thing, was to move into sampling. And some of those samples are analog synthesizers. Before the Surge left, you know, I spent weeks just recreating these batches that I had done and sampling them. And so I would have to say I've been a sample maniac ever since, you know. And in the constant search for, as Steve calls it, sample food.
Would anyone else like to chime in on the analog digital? Steve?
The question, okay. It just occurred to me that we're missing someone here. No representative from Stella Mara could make it?
They were invited. I don't know what
because one question that came to mind is something that I was going to ask Sonia, and maybe Stefan Mikus also would have an opinion on this, and that's the influence of world music or other music from other cultures and how those are blended together to create a new original music. And there's an interesting, it's interesting how different Stella Mara's music is in that, from yours, Stefan, in that they would take traditional music, folk songs, let's say, from Bulgaria, and recreate it with different instrumentation, sometimes electronics, and come up with something that sounds very new. Whereas with your music, you've oftentimes studied with master musicians from different cultures, but when the time comes to actually make an album, you have these different instruments speaking to each other in a new way.
Well, first of all, I don't know the music of Stella Maris, but that there seems to be one basic difference is that I never use traditional melodies or tunes or whatever. I learn the instruments in the traditional context and then try to forget what I learned and start a new thing. What really interests me is to discover new ways to play the ancient instruments. In most cases, I modify them to my needs. I also order new versions of traditional instruments to be made by instrument makers, and one thing I really like is to bring together instruments which had never been played together before because of their geographical distance. And
do you have any tuning issues or things like that you have to circumvent in doing that? Tuning issues, or problems where the instruments don't talk to each other that well.
Intonation.
No.
That's good.
You can tune anything. You can tune even flutes, and I do this, or duduks. Any instrument you can tune, and so I never had a tuning problem.
And how do you go about? Is it intuitive the way you layer these different instruments through multi-tracking? How do you decide? Okay, you wake up one morning and you say, "I want to play duduk," and then how do you decide what to add to the duduk for a full layered sound?
Yeah, well, usually it works like this: that at a certain time I have maybe one or two instruments which I like to play at the moment, or they are also new for me, and I'm exploring their possibilities, and I'm starting to improvise on those or one instrument. And usually I have a tape machine running when I improvise. And after a certain time, maybe there are some passages which I think they're quite interesting, maybe. And then these are like seeds which can grow into a composition. And at a certain moment, I then decide, okay, this will be a solo piece only for this instrument, or do I want to add another instrument, or maybe two or even more, And so in this way, I'm composing, usually through a whole series of improvisations.
So it's a very intuitive process.
Yeah, very intuitive. I understand that some composers, they take a piece of paper and a pencil and they sit down on a table and they just start to write. I mean, this for me is absolutely amazing. I mean, I could never do. I would always have to play the instrument myself, and for me, the music comes from this very intimate relation with that instrument, and not even you could go so far as that. If, for example, if I compose for a flute or for shakuhachi or ney, whatever, it is only for this flute, not any shakuhachi, but it has to be that one, because it's in a way the instrument also speaking, and I'm trying to. Part of my work is to understand what this instrument wants to say to me, and so that you can never do with a paper and a pencil, obviously. So that's another. I'm not criticizing, of course, that way of working at all. It's just completely another approach.
Another mindset, and then another way of doing kind of the same thing. Is with electronics, with sampling. And I know, Michael, that you've talked about world orchestra as opposed to world music, where you're taking these different instruments from different cultures, like in some of Baraka's score, for instance, and you create a whole new sound experience from that.
I think it's maybe part of our time as we're waking up, the parts of the whole, so to speak, are waking up to the totality of the whole and the other parts. And I've always felt, as Stefan was saying, that each instrument has its own voice and has something that it wants to be brought forth. One of my first experiences with that was with my friend Paul A. Bell, who traveled around the world for 2 years collecting bells from different traditions. And he and I were doing he has a studio home up in Lake Arrowhead, California. He and I were doing an all-night session where we set all the bells up, 200 and some bells in this big circle, and then we would move from bell to bell. And I had this insight that for centuries, generations, these bells have been played as parts of different cultures, ceremonies, and religious practices, and now they were all in one room, and each had its own voice, and yet they all were speaking together, and that's what this time is about. And so that's, when I was working on Baraka and then on Samsara more recently, I've had this sense of like a global orchestra, as you said, where rather than world music, where you're focusing on the music from, and how it has emerged from a culture, but how they come together and participate together.
Regarding this question of world music and the vocabulary of Western versus non-Western languages, there's a quote of Lou Harrison's that I love, which is, "All music is world music." And that unfolds itself to a different way of looking at this question, which could be posed in a negative light as sort of cultural imperialism, which assumes that we are the dominant culture, we being the European, North American, Western, First World. And first of all, we're seeing that change. And it's a very arrogant, self-centered approach to say, well, we are in a powerful position to appropriate. Whereas, in fact, if we take that assumption away and approach ourselves all as equals in creation and in the arts, we all learn from everyone, and all music appropriates what we think of as indigenous music or ancient music or ethnic music is something that did not grow up in a vacuum. It also appropriated its ancestors and its neighbors. And so when we do this with respect, and when we find ourselves feeling the music of a certain culture and its language with our heart, and when we study it, as Stefan has, and Hans, who is brilliant in many, many instruments from around the world. I've been hugely influenced, for example, by the melodic language of North Indian and North African and Persian music, and that ecstatic melodic thread. And so then what we do is we try to find the core, the seed of humanity within the things that we all do around the planet to express ourselves. And then we find how that resonates within us, and we speak from that place within ourselves that's natural to our own voice. So I think when we're all working with these languages that aren't just Western classical music, we're doing that with this very intuitive, integrating approach of expressing our deep inner selves with the best language that we can find. And as Michael is saying, we're now with international communications and with a situation which is not so imperialistically centralized, we can do this with a more natural humility as well, I think. And I embrace that.
Now, I think that's a really, really important point that could be the theme not only of Hearts of Space, but of this conference and of all the work that all of you do. Each of us has, I think of what we now, for convenience, call ambient music as a very old stream of insight into sound and music. Something that, if you look back across the centuries, you keep finding it in other places, in other cultures, in other times. And if I hadn't made the decision in the 1970s to go beyond thinking of music as just Western or just Eastern or just electronic or just acoustic, and tried to look for that sort of more common core, that I don't think Hearts of Space would have survived all this time. You know, it had to be deeper than that in order to resonate with everybody, and in order for the musicians, because we have this, for better or worse, we have this society which is constantly looking for innovation and looking for something new and not paying attention to something old. You know, so all the pressure is pulling us forward. So that's my next question. How do you see this approach to, you know, deep sound experience and deep musical experience and deep inner expression coming out in your work in the future and in music in the future?
Stephen, I don't think there's a how. I don't, other than just paying attention, and as we all have been sharing how we live our lives and how it unfolds out of our lives, I really don't think there's a how. It's just, it's what's happening, and it will continue to unfold.
Kind of tying that together with a previous question and what Stefan was saying about that the instrument is telling him what to play. The instrument wants to express itself. I really resonate with that comment. And when you're in that kind of consciousness, you don't even think about how in the future or any of that, or whether we're speaking a Western language or whether it's imperialistic or this or that. None of that matters. Okay, we are in a singular mode of consciousness when I play music. I don't think about any context of any kind. That's the beauty of it. We escape our mind. And we do it either through electronics, or we do it with a sarangi or a cello or with live looping or pre-programmed, and it doesn't matter. That's why we're here. That is what glues us together right now. It's that singularity of the experience. It's the non-dualistic thing that we usually live in. It's the sweet torture of our daily lives, right? So Hearts of Space, to me, was one of the unique expressions of music that takes us out of the dualistic mind into this kind of sacred space of sorts. And that will continue in the future. How? Well, we'll see. You know, I don't know about the details on that. Just wanted to throw that in a little bit.
Thank you. Any questions in the audience?
I've been politely waiting to...
Okay, sorry, I was looking the other way.
I was
All right.
actually was going to walk over to that mic and get into your line of sight.
Okay.
But I saw Sigur Rós in concert about 3 weeks ago. Oh, a little closer to the mic. Are we on the mic?
No,
there we
that's
go.
fine. Now he's got it.
I saw Sigur Rós in concert about 3 weeks ago. And their opening act, and I hope that person is not in this room, was 30 minutes of the most unendurable digital music I have ever heard. And I was shocked that someone could get in front of a group of that stature and be that unendurable. And so I guess my question is, the funny question is, do you think that we ought to require some demonstration of musical competence before you're allowed to purchase a piece of digital music equipment? I mean, the musicality factor of this performer was as close to absolute zero as I have ever seen on a stage. But the genuine question is, where do you see the limits of technology? I mean, we're going through this, we're in the infancy of this digital age, and things are just exploding left and right. And this was an obvious, like, this guy shouldn't be here.
I can assure you that person is not here.
Yeah, well, you never know. I mean, there's a whole audience here too, So, but at any rate, yeah. I mean, what the question is, where do you see the limits of technology, or abuses of technology, or things that we should maybe not go there?
Anybody want to try that?
Well, everybody has to decide that for himself, probably. It's the same argument. You go to an art museum and you say, that's not art. But one thing you have to, I mean, I think we're all entitled to opinion, and you're saying, well, I'm drawing the line here. But it's also, I'm 53 almost now, and I realize there's a new generation of artists, and they have different standards and different definitions of their craft. And I hope I'll always stay flexible enough to be interested in how they define their levels of excellence. It may not be my levels of excellence, but I'm curious to have a dialogue about it with them. And that's what I want to offer.
I should add that this person was booed by the audience. That's how
Oh boy.
Well, Buckminster Fuller once said that if they had figured out how to make a weapon out of solar energy, we would be a solar society right now. So maybe music can be a weapon as well.
Next question from the audience.
I think what everybody seems to be dwelling on is a term called synchronicity, where everything kind of comes together out of the blue, unseemingly related, and just perform and develop something unexpected. And I think that's what music is really all about. It's a universal language that speaks to us differently. Each note is something different that brings out something very special in us. And for me, Hearts of Space was that. So thank you.
Thank you. George Wallace.
Hi, folks. Hi there. Check, check. It's working. Well, first, it's an honor to be here talking to you all on the stage and everybody in the audience. And especially after hearing you speak, I could spend an hour or two with each of you, and maybe, hopefully will someday or sooner or later. The question I have is about, and this is asked as a fan, a listener, and as a co-artist. The future of albums versus singles. I've been walking around talking to my friends. Hey, I just put out a new record, and they say things like, well, everything's on iTunes now, and everybody's cherry picking. It's the single. So what's your favorite song? And my record is almost 70 minutes of music, and I prefer that it be heard as a piece, and not as, well, what's your favorite song? So the question is, do any of you guys have any regard for the cherry picking effect that is now out on iTunes as it applies to popular music, but it's trying to leak over into the ambient experience where short little attention spans really don't apply? So any thoughts on that?
Okay, I'm going to take a shot at this one just because starting in July of 2011, I kind of broke away from the mold of a, CD comes out, and I saw that too. I had plenty of people talking to me when I would talk to friends about, why buy the whole album? There's only 2 or 3 good songs on it, whatever, and everyone has their own opinion on that. But as far as releasing the singles, I thought that I would maybe add my own approach to it. So for a year, starting in July of 2011, I released a single every month with 30 cents from every sale going to a different charity that I would pick for that month. And for something like that, when you're doing it, I think as a maybe an add-on to what you normally do, I think it works really good. Some people are completists in what they do, and they want everything that an artist will put out. Other people are a little more casual about it. They only want a few things. I think, though, I think everyone up here has, they could point to some recording in their career where they kind of did a non-standard approach to what they were doing. And I think if you take a non-standard approach, I think the singles can be great. Again, I prefer to, when I release something as a actual project, I'd like people to sit down and listen to it as an album, because that's kind of how I put it together. But if they're getting enjoyment from just a couple of tunes here and a couple of tunes there, I'm certainly not going to say, well, I don't want you listening to my stuff then. So
I think there's one thing that I've seen, which is on project releases, it averages something like 70% of the income is full album downloads. So people are still wanting to hear the whole thing. What you're talking about, definitely Lady Gaga or something like that, you want the single and the rest might be filler. But I don't think people say only one of these songs in one of Robert's albums or any of your albums is going to be the good one. So I think it also has to do with what kind of music and who is buying it. But on the other hand, like Eric Wollo has put out some EPs, just 4 tracks, about 25 minutes, as a separate entity, separate from albums. And it's kind of like a taste of where you're at right now, like what you're saying. It doesn't necessarily need to be either. It's really how people want to listen and what the artist's intention is with it.
Yeah, my position on this is that the album is an artifact of an era. It was created by the record companies to sell you 12 tracks instead of 1, because it wasn't economical for them to sell you 1, and the singles business was just endured. Today it's about an artist making a relationship with their audience any way they can, and that may include more frequent releases of single tracks, limited albums, full albums. A lot of it has to do with the kind of music you make. An ambient album that takes you on a journey across 70 minutes is obviously a different thing from a 3-minute pop song. So, we have a much richer toolkit now and a much richer communication landscape that's available to us because of the internet and all these new digital services. The very fact that you can come to the Hearts of Space website and have access to over 1,000 programs is itself completely revolutionary development. But as an artist, you also have the ability to reach out to your audience in many different ways, and that's going to become the standard. And there's no reason why individual artists that have a personality and way in which they like to operate can't do it their way. I think they will increasingly do it their way, you know, and so there isn't going to be any one way anymore. Over here.
Thanks, Stephen. One comment and one question. The comment is first to just acknowledge you and Hearts of Space and the 40 years of creating richer and deeper consciousness, because I think if in the world today there is one thing that will shape our future, that's it. And to the artists here, as a fellow composer, musician, to you as the torchbearers for being out in front and following what you do with such deep passion. My question, though, is this. I notice an absence of reference to religion or spirituality. And much of the world is using language in those two domains. And so when they think about how to access this inner core that you all talk about, that's much of the language, and it's very exciting. Yoga and all of these elements that are moving forward today with a richness is very much an indication, I think, of where we want and need to go. Do you think about your music in that particular language, a particular aspiration or inspiration that comes from a spiritual practice, or is the music that spirituality for you?
Can I say something about that? I produce a lot of music for the yoga market, so to speak, so working with artists that have taken on a spiritual practice and translate that into recordings. And I think there is, for me personally, a deep connection between music and spirituality. Mm-hmm. My personal story is I grew up in a Lutheran church. I was improvising in a church as a young teenager, daring God to reveal himself. God, do you exist? Here I am playing my cello, you know, improvising cello, but really forming kind of a daredevil prayer to God, you know? Throw in with that the acoustics of this huge church. Boom, those are the ingredients for my musical career. And so spirituality, I'm sure for everybody here, has some significance, whether it's a sonic experience or a prayer experience or however it may be, you know. But I think it's actually, I think the music of Hearts of Space is very spiritual music, but it's outside the established labels. That's my opinion on that.
Thank you, James. Over here.
Hi. I have a two-part question for Steve Hill and Steve Davis and Stephen Hill, if you will. Many of the programs are works of art themselves because they combine the work of many people. And I'm curious about what the process of creating those programs is, and many of them are masterpieces. And the second question is, how has it been difficult to persuade radio stations to play the entire hour with no breaks?
You know, that was controversial when we started, but this is one thing I have to credit to my former co-producer, Anna Turner. Anna was absolutely determined that the shows would not be interrupted, you know, and it was against every rule for radio. But it was 1983, and we had something that nobody had ever heard of before. It was this weird music from California with this, you know. And I have to credit the open-mindedness of a core of music directors and program directors in public radio. And at that point in 1983, public radio was a much less evolved marketplace than it is now. There wasn't as much pressure on all these programming decisions. And there were a lot of small stations that said, what the hell, you know, we'll take a choice. We're going to put it on Sunday night. Nobody's listening anyway, you know. So, and then they had a good feedback system in public radio, so they then said, hey, this thing is really working. We got numbers all of a sudden on Sunday night that we've never seen before. So that was how we did it. And we just said, you can't interrupt this, period. You know, you want to put announcements in the beginning, at the end, knock yourself out, but you can't interrupt this. And there were a few stations that tried to do that, and it was the audience that told them, "Are you out of your mind? You don't want to do that. Don't do that again." So we just put our foot down and
Thank
said,
you for that.
for at least an hour in your broadcast week, you're gonna behave like there was another way to do this. As far as creating the programs are concerned, thank you for that acknowledgement. Again, this goes back to the early days on KPFA, but we used to do these long improvised sets. And Anna and I would just bring a lot of records to the radio station, start with something, try and figure out what the next best thing was to play, and so on and so forth. And, Anna would write down those sequences. And over time, we came to realize, hey, some of these things are a lot better than others. And in fact, one of the great things and one of the hard things when we decided to syndicate was boiling it down to an hour. We'd been doing shows. In fact, when I first came to KPFA, they said, here's how you turn the transmitter on. Here's how you turn it off. When you get tired, just turn it off and leave. And if we didn't get tired, the morning guy would come in and life would go on, So we got used to doing these improvised sets, but when we had to do the 1 hour show for syndication, then we had a whole week to carefully compose a sequence. And we took what we had learned from our improvised work on the radio and we applied it to composing these sequences. But again, Anna was very clear that there was a trajectory and a goal, which was to navigate into these deeper kinds of music, that they somehow meant more when you had a way of getting there, which made sense. Later I came to understand it as these are the rules of the contemplative experience, whether it's an artistic experience or a meditation experience or a spiritual experience. It really doesn't matter. It has phases. It has a beginning and somebody referred to as an induction phase, where it's simply pulling you in. And then, it's moving forward and deepening over time. And someone like Steve spends weeks discovering what will lead you into those places, by playing things over and over again. It's a practice, so that's the secret, if there is one, which is we're looking to go as deep as we can go on the programs. We try and do that. Steve Davis and I, collaborate to do this, and Steve takes a shot at it, and we agree on a theme or at least an area that we're going to concentrate on at the beginning, and we start and just keep putting music in. Steve will do that. I come back and kibitz basically and criticize and throw out things, and Steve scratches his head a little deeper, and it's a working process.
I was going to compare it to writing an essay. You start with a first draft, and I come up with something for Stephen to listen to. He reviews it and makes certain changes, edits pieces, tosses pieces that he doesn't like or whatever, and says, okay, here's a whole. We need to find some piece that will connect from the movement part he was talking about to the deepening part. And then I have to find fill a hole of 5 minutes or 10 minutes or something like that. And then I make essentially a second draft. Stephen listens to it again, and we do, I'd say, 3 or 4 iterations usually. And thanks for the comments about the quality of the programs. These are weekly. We have weekly deadlines. So, and sometimes I think the programs are more successful than others, you know, and everyone has their favorites, you know.
Right.
Okay. Another question? How about over here?
Hi, my name is Sato.
Sato.
Sato, yes. I would like to first thank you, everybody, for coming and appreciating this AMBIcon. And I have not been able to do much music, although I'm very musically inclined myself, simply because of money issues. So I'm getting more into the film genre. I'm working on a film right now that's going to be taking place in Japan mostly. And one comment, especially I think was Michael Stearns was talking about with the Baraka, that one thing is not so much the technique and whether it's digital or analog and whatever nationality or modern or ancient. I think the most important thing and the purpose of music is to express one's heart. And the very name Hearts of Space symbolizes that, just those 3 words. And it's from the heart. We don't have to be the greatest singer in the world. We don't have to be the best, technical player or technique. I think it's the heart what comes out. That all that is a tool. And to me, I think that is the most important thing. And I have been a faithful listener since the 70s. And that's why I listen to it practically when I can every week. Because it's music of the heart. And as a Rosicrucian, I even use that in our convocations. But this, to me, is the message I want. It's that one word, heart. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Go ahead.
Is this on? Okay, my name's Robert. This is, first of all, Stephen Hill et al. Thank you for putting on AMBIcon. I hope this continues and grows. I look forward to being here next year.
Yeah, me too.
Okay. Best of luck to that. To the whole group of musicians on stage, regardless of what musical instruments you might start with and the recording methods, you can end up with a digital file. Have any of you, have you considered, or can you at least comment on online collaboration? And I hope this creates some synergy with the group that's up there now.
I have the microphone, so maybe I'll take a crack at that. I've had friends, Hans-Joachim Rodelius of the group Cluster has been a good friend of mine for 30 years, and we've met so many times, but ironically, the first time we really started to work together, it was just too far apart to get together. So we ended up trading tracks back and forth, and I know from a business perspective that the future of music is, and being able to make a living from it, is very dependent on new technologies. But I can say that the absolute freedom that digital files and the internet has provided, being able to finish something and have it sitting in Baden, Austria, a few minutes later to be worked on there is really an amazing thing that I think will keep bringing people, like-minded people, together. Everything, when we all started, I know, was by the mail, and you'd write a letter, and I wonder if I really like your music, I wonder if you'd like to collaborate, and 2 years later you were doing something after waiting for the ships to take your master tapes back and forth. So it's an incredibly liberating thing, and I think for all of us that have done long-distance collaborations, it almost feels like, in some cases, that they're actually there with you. So hopefully, I'm sure that the younger generation will only really continue that in ways that we can't even imagine.
Last question, Joseph Jacobs.
Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Joseph.
Actually, it's 2 very short questions for Stephen Hill. One is, you may or may not remember when you told me this, how you came up with the name Hearts of Space. It involves a salad and Potrero Hill or something.
No. No. I have told this story before. It was in 1973. I applied to KPFA to do a new program, and they said, "What's it called?" And that was a good question, and I didn't have an answer. And I remember going home to have lunch. My wife was making a salad, so that was the salad part.
See?
And I was sitting out in the garden in back of the house, sitting in the sun and just thinking about this. And I've never channeled anything in my life, but this was the closest I've come to that experience. I just heard it. Just like somebody was whispering in my ear, Hearts of Space. So I wrote it down, and I thought, well, that was interesting. Maybe I'll come up with something better, but I didn't. So that's how it came out.
The other question is, there's a famous postcard that came in the mail, speaking of not interrupting the music, on the broadcasts, and a little faux pas in your career, which I think you should share with our friends.
Yes.
Thank you.
Joseph's referring to, we did a program back in probably around the first 100, and we programmed The Lark Ascending by Ray Vaughan Williams, which is a famous and beautiful piece of classical music. And it ends with this exquisite violin solo ascending into the stratosphere. But the problem was that we had run out of time. And so I tried to compensate for this by making an announcement like, we're really sorry, we have to break in here and end this program, but this is what you heard, and we'll and we let it continue to the end, because I had to just do the outro announcement, which stepped all over The Lark Ascending. So 3 days later, we get a postcard. Shut up, all the larks ascending, you fucking moron. Okay, I think that's a great note to end on.